Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I've been doing radio around here for the better part of 3 decades, and I have never said the 10-2 Baltimore Ravens. Luke Jones joins us now in the aftermath of, well, you're dry. I mean, I'm still like sort of thawing out. I'll be thawing out into Thursday and into South Korea before the week's all over with, but this was a different kind of test, right? And I think through the locker room and talking to the players after the game, you find yourself in a tied game against a really good football team at home where the sun is set, it's dark out, it's tied, it's late. Can you win that kind of game? And, you know, the Ravens checked another box, right?
Yeah, they did. And I think this is one of those games that carries a lot of value that doesn't necessarily just show up when you watch the highlights or when you look at the box score. I mean, this, let's face it, in the midst of not just an 8-game winning streak, but more specifically going back to the Seattle game, this is a team that doesn't need style points. They've provided so many over the course of their last 4 or 5 wins that you go into a meeting with San Francisco understanding the elements weren't going to be pretty. That became pretty apparent by about Thursday. Knowing that you're going up against a good team. And I don't care who you are, whether you're talking about the best team in the NFL, the number 1 ranked team in college basketball, whatever the sport might be. When you have the kind of success that the Ravens were having, I think there is something to be said about some human nature of, is it really this easy? And not that you become disinterested, but maybe you don't have that same intensity level. And that's not to say that I don't think the Ravens were intense on Sunday, but I think there was some value to playing in a close game, not everything going perfectly, not putting RG fourth quarter because you're up by 5 touchdowns, and beating a really good football team. I mean, let's face it, the Ravens scored a season-low 20 points. They gave up not their season high, but very close to it in terms of rushing yards. They gave up 174 yards on the ground. So
they got pushed around as much as they have in 2 months defensively, right? Let's just call that what it is. And that's what you expect a 10-1 team that wants to run the football to come do, right?
Exactly. And they won. So to me, that says a lot about the Ravens. And I think that says a lot about the 49ers. Hey, they came into Baltimore, 1 o'clock East Coast game, you know, that whole story for teams. And they gave the Ravens everything they could handle. So I think it's a really good win for the Ravens, even if it doesn't have the same style and flash and box score numbers of some of their recent wins against good teams.
Well, when you beat everybody by 40 points, you beat them by 3, you like sort of shrug your shoulders and say, well, you know, whatever. But, I mean, I remember when beating a 10-1 team by 3 points on a field goal was like a great day.
Right. And that kind of speaks to where they are, that you watch the performance and you say, hey, good win, but you didn't come away from it overwhelmed by what you saw. But again, it speaks to where this team is, that, you know, I don't even want to classify it as a letdown or anything like that. That's crazy.
Well, it's expectations. It's literally you're a 6-point favorite. They didn't cover the spread, literally, right? I mean,
exactly. Expectations have just spiraled out of control in that sense, but yet they still handled it. They found themselves in a dogfight, and they found a way to win the football game. So I think from that context, it's a little reminder that, no, it's not quite as easy as it was the last 5 games every single week. It's not. It hasn't become that easy. It's not that much of a cakewalk the rest of the way. And 2, when you encounter this again, whether, I don't know if it's going to be in the regular season based on who they're playing the rest of the way, but once you get into January, you know this team's going to be playing at least one playoff game, and you hope a much deeper run than that, if not winning the whole thing. But the next time they find themselves in this kind of position, you now have a more recent experience to draw from, where you say, hey, guys, you know, okay, we're not blowing someone out today, but we're going to get this thing done. And I think that's where this carries a little more value, in addition to, winning your 8th in a row, which is a regular season record. I want to emphasize that because you don't want to disrespect the 2000 Ravens, who won 11 in a row overall.
Who still haven't lost.
Yeah, exactly. 8 straight wins, though, really darn impressive. And when you think about where this team was going into the beginning of October, and now 2 months later at the beginning of December, I think Sunday, even if it wasn't the overwhelming demolition of another top team, but it was another win over a top team. And I'm sorry. How anyone cannot say the Ravens aren't the best team in the NFL with another good example beating the best team in the NFC. I just don't know what to tell you. I'm convinced if you don't think they are the best team in the league, I'm convinced you're not really watching the game.
Well, they're going to need to do that next month, right? And now that we're into December, they're going to need to do that in January. And this was one of those, sort of flashcards to say 6 weeks from now, in our building, there's going to come a Houston or a Pittsburgh or a Buffalo or a whomever it's going to be, right? I don't know what it's going to be. Kansas City, whatever it's going to be, you're going to have to be up to that test, and you're going to find yourself in a 14-14, 17-17, 20-17, whatever game on a cold day. It had rain, it had mud, it had mistakes. It had a defense that gave up. Really, the Achilles heel would be like if you're going to give up the run the way they did, you're going to have a hard time winning in the old days. If you're going to let Mostert come in and go 19 for $146 at home, that's a bad day for the Ravens defense most of the time. But in this particular case, they did enough to offset it and win a game that they could have lost, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is a great game from a confidence-building standpoint, just knowing that it's not going to be as easy as it was the previous 5 games. I think it does serve as a little bit of a wake-up call with a victory in hand, mind you. But, again, in case some of these young guys who haven't been around this, I mean, it's one thing to talk about a Marshall Yanda, an Earl Thomas, a Jimmy Smith, guys who've been around, guys who've won Super Bowls, whether here or elsewhere. Those guys don't need the reminder, but those guys that are in their first or second year, and you go on the kind of roll that the Ravens had just been on over the previous 5 weeks when you beat Seattle by 14, you beat New England by 17, you beat Houston by 34, you beat the Rams by 39, a 22 or 23-year-old playing in the NFL, either for the first time or maybe in their second season, I think there's probably a thought to, this kind of feels like college. This is pretty easy. If you're talking about someone that played at a big time.
Well, how about like for a Bradley Bozeman or one of these Alabama guys or Andrews, these Oklahoma guys? I mean, 9-2 was a bad year. 10-2 wasn't good enough where they're from, quite frankly, right?
Right. Well, but the point I was trying to make though is some of these young guys, you have the kind of role. I mean, and I remember talking to you last week, and I said at the time I thought the Ravens were going to win by at least 2 scores against the 49ers. And I felt that way because of how impressive this football team has been. Not that I necessarily was convinced they were never, ever going to lose or never, ever play in a close game again. But my point is when you have the kind of game that they had on Sunday, got to win, wasn't the prettiest, wasn't perfect, I think it does serve as a nice little reminder to some of the young guys that, no, it's not that easy every single week.
We don't get on a plane and go 3,000 miles and beat the Rams by 40 points every week, right? Yeah,
I mean, the stuff that the Ravens were doing the last 5 games was 2007 Patriots kind of stuff. I mean, that historic kind of run that they just were on. And now, okay, it's a 3-point win over the 49ers, the best team in the NFC, and we're talking about it in terms of, it wasn't as impressive as it's been the last few weeks. And I think that's where, from a big picture standpoint, I just think there's a lot of value for this game. I think there's a lot, and you mentioned this with how the 49ers ran the ball in this defense. I think there's going to be a lot on tape for these coaches to have the players' attention, maybe a little bit more than they might under the normal circumstances of an 8-game winning streak and a 10-2 record, and going into December looking like you're going to be favored in your last 4 regular season games. I think it was really good in that from that standpoint, and they still got to win. So it's a lot. There are a lot of positives, I think, from an intangible standpoint from this football game. Even though they only scored 20 points and they gave up a bunch of yards on the ground, and Lamar Jackson barely had over 100 passing yards, and so you can you can pick all those things apart if you want. I don't think that many people really are. I think you just look at it and say, hey, they beat a good team, and they didn't absolutely play their best football to do it. So that speaks a lot to just how darn good this football team really is.
He is Luke Jones. He'll be darn good out in Owings Mills all week, getting ready for the Buffalo Bills. A little reminder, broadcast reminder, you'll see me out on social media traveling the world. I'll be catching up with tons of Buffalo people this week. We'll have full coverage. We got a bunch of new sponsors as well. First things first, I want to thank Royal Farms for coming back strong in 2020, signing on for us. I love our folks at Rofo, love using the app, love eating the fried chicken, love picking up the ice cream that I do and pumping my gas as well. Big shout out to Frank Schilling, Ed Stronsky, the whole team over at Rofo. Big thanks to them, as well as Justin Tucker for hitting that field goal, part of the Rofo team as well. Liberty Pure Solutions, we're going to tell you about water and clean drinking water. The water right here in my Strategic Factory Cup is Liberty Pure Solutions water. I've got new stuff going on around here. We're going to be telling you all about this through 2020. Baltimore Positives brought a whole bunch of blessings our way, including a conversation with Police Commissioner Harrison coming up next week. That's next Thursday, the 12th. That'll be at Fadley's. Don Moeller and I recorded episode 100 that you're going to hear a little later on in the week. You're going to hear my Masson lecture at Mount St. Mount St. Mary, not Mount St. Joe. I'll have Chris Pica come on and lecture about Mount St. Joe at some point. But big sponsorship news, big stuff going on into 2020, and some great folks, including Curio Wellness and our friends out there in Strategic Factory, as I bring the cups and the hats and the shirts and all the good stuff out onto the set here as the Ravens go to 10-2. Luke, the run game and stopping the run, as you pointed out, there's going to be some film on this, certainly for Wink. It felt to me like the 49ers at various points did what they wanted to do, right on up until third or fourth down when they couldn't do what they wanted to do. But statistically, Garoppolo, played a pretty decent game, I thought. Wasn't perfect, but they leaned on their running game and on their O-line, and they got that going. They didn't complement it as much as they would have liked to in the passing game on a wet day. But, boy, the 49ers, they got on a plane and went 3,000 miles, and they were serious about being 11-1.
There's no question, especially when the news came out. I think I saw it Saturday when I was going to bed. I believe an NFL Network report that Matt Breida, their starting running back, who's been really accomplished, wasn't going to play. So they were down their starting running back. But I think what you saw the 49ers do, and they did it very, very effectively, it's the old, go back to Gary Kubiak and then Mike Shanahan before that, the outside zone stretch plays that the Ravens just had a lot of trouble with. And we saw Cleveland do a lot of that in week 4. I think this Ravens defense that has improved immensely over the last 6 or 7 weeks, and even if you look at some of the efficiency metrics and different things of that nature, you could argue they've been the best defense in the NFL over the last 6 or 7 weeks. But I think one thing that's been masked a little bit is I don't think their run defense has been as good as going into this week. They were ranked 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per game. You look at their yards per carry, a little more middle of the pack. The reason why teams haven't run on the Ravens a whole lot is why? They've been ahead so much that teams have almost had to throw. So you get in this rare instance, or at least recently it's been rare, of a team that wasn't playing from behind, wasn't down 2 or 3 touchdowns and needing to throw 25 or 30 times in the second half. They were allowed to stay on schedule, and that's a good rushing football team. So I think we're seeing some of the issues that we know have been issues, even if they've been minimized or marginalized over the last 6-7 games. The plays as far as setting the edge, we know that this team at outside linebacker, it's not a strength. We know that they're counting on guys like Jalen Ferguson and Tyus Bowser, and I'm not singling those two out individually, although I saw a couple of occasions where Ferguson definitely lost contain trying to set the edge. But we know that's been an issue. We know that even though Josh Bynes and L.J. Fort came in to solidify the inside linebacker position, they're not Ray Lewis and Bart Scott playing there. Let's be very clear. So we've seen the Ravens use so much time, rely so heavily on their secondary, but, and I pointed this out prior to the game in my pregame inactives and notes post at WNST.net, San Francisco uses 2 running backs or 2 tight ends, or sometimes 2 running backs and 2 tight ends on the field roughly 60% of the time, some combination of any of those possibilities. And when you do that, you can't go to a dime package. So, yeah, the Ravens had a few more, had more linebackers, more defensive linemen on the field, which, if you notice, San Fran did not run between the tackles very effectively, but they were able to get to the edges. And certainly you have to be impressed with Raheem Mostert, a guy who was in Baltimore for, I believe, 7 games back in 2015. He's done a nice job for them. And even though they've had some injuries at the running back position, he's filled in nicely. And but again, that's the old Shanahan, Kubiak kind of running game where those same plays, everyone knows what plays are coming, but it's very difficult to stop it, and they block very well. And that's something that the Ravens are going to have to clean up because even though they're not necessarily going to play teams that have that good a rushing attack between now and the end of the regular season, certainly they're going to encounter some of that in the postseason. So certainly Wink Martindale and his coaching staff, they'll have the players' attention this week after giving up that many on the ground. That's just that's not something that's acceptable for a Ravens defense, and the players be the first ones to tell you that.
He is Luke Jones. He'll be at Knowings Mills all week long. I am going to be flying over the ocean. You're going to be seeing me do all sorts of things. If you don't follow me out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and all those places, this will be a good week to jump on the train. Lots of Baltimore positive coming your way. Lots of Bills coming your way. Lots of Lamar. If you've heard or haven't heard any of the conversations through the holiday about folks' views of Lamar, and we'll get to Lamar before it's all over with, and we'll get to the Patriots and chasing them and where we are in the game in Buffalo. But I guess for a moment, Luke, let's talk about Justin Tucker. And, I gave a shout-out to Royal Farms on the fried chicken and the coffee and all that good stuff, but he hasn't been called on to be Justin Tucker in the way that when we were 3 clouds in 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and we're always at the 52-yard line trying to kick 59-yard field goals to win games in Detroit years ago. The Joe Flacco offense. I guess we're 7-8 years in. We're now getting to the point where we are discussing him in the Hall of Very Good as a kicker, which you and I have sat with Morton Anderson, Ray Guy, a handful of other specialists that have been deemed worthy at this point. I guess Vinatieri will be a guy that, we'll talk about that. But Tucker and where he is at this point and kicking this kind of field goal where it looked like they sort of gave up at the 30-yard line. It didn't feel like they needed to get to the 15 or 20 the way other teams would want to in the rain, in Baltimore, all of that it feels effortless and flawless. I mean, he's only really missed one, right, ever to lose a game or with the game on the line where we were like, wow, how did that happen? When he steps up, I'm sitting with you. We didn't say a word to each other, but I packed my stuff up. I mean, I just felt like 49 yards is not outside the realm of anything that's not normal for him. But it is not normal. Much like Lamar Jackson's not normal, it's not normal.
Sure. And I think, and Justin Tucker talked about this after the game. I mean, this, with some of the renovations that they've done to the stadium, Jerry Rosberg talked about this in the past. Tucker's talked about this. Sam Cooke has talked about this. This has become, not that it was ever an easy stadium to kick in, but there have been some more challenges that these guys have talked about. I don't know if it has to do with the notch scoreboards in the corners and maybe the wind swirls a little bit more.
Luke, come on. Those are victory arches. I mean, come on. That's what they told me to say back in 1996, so I have to stick with that.
Right. But
did you know that, or did you know they were called victory arches?
I vaguely remember that, but I always thought it was
I just want to bring that up for the comedy because David Modell is no longer with us, and if he were sitting here, he would laugh. So on behalf of Art, the victory arches, sorry.
Yeah, but now they have the scoreboards there. But those guys have talked about it's challenging. And then, of course, I mean, it was an absolutely miserable game to play in on Sunday. I mean, rain, and there was not dramatically strong wind, but certainly some gusts, and the wind was moving. So there was a challenge there, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Sam Cooke as well when the Ravens, after the no call and the pass interference, hardball challenges. We know how challenges have gone with pass interference. The Ravens didn't win the challenge. But what does Sam Cooke do? From his own 37, he punts the ball 62 yards down to the San Francisco 1. And we've joked so much about Sam Cooke, how maybe he needs to be renamed to Ravens holder Sam Cooke and not Ravens punter Sam Cooke because of how little he's done it, especially since the bye week. But he gives you a great kick there, helps you from a field position standpoint. at a time when they needed it after San Francisco had tied it up on the previous drive with the field goal. And then it brings us back to Justin Tucker, as you mentioned, a guy that they have not had to lean on nearly as much this year. And that's a good thing. And he'd be the first to tell you that's a good thing.
Justin Tucker loves winning games 45-6.
He does. And privately, he'd probably like to be kicking a couple more field goals here and there. But he does like kicking extra points. And he's been able to had the opportunity to kick more extra points than any kicker in Ravens history because they've scored more touchdowns than any team in Ravens history. But in that spot, and we even saw it, I mean, there was the little bit of the hiccup after they picked up the first down. I believe, I want to say maybe a kind of a shaky snap. Lamar bobbled it, something like that. They lost a couple yards. No panic. They didn't go into a position where they say, boy, we need to really make up some yardage here. Why? Because they have Justin Tucker. And he's done this so many times in so many clutch situations. I mean, beating the San Francisco 49ers in Week 13 with a last-second 49-yard field goal, where does that even rank on the list of biggest Justin Tucker kicks? I mean, I don't know if does it crack the top 10 even? I don't even know. I mean, but that's a compliment to him. And it's a reminder that even with this team not relying on its kicking game nearly as much as it has in the past, that those guys are still there. And going back to the point I made a few minutes ago, just talking about this team in general, that they're going to play some close games still between now and Ravens fans hope Miami in the Super Bowl in early February. And chances are Sam Cooke and Justin Tucker are going to have to make some big contributions, and they were able to do that on Sunday. And to your point, there are very, very, very few teams in the NFL who are feeling all that confident about a 49-yard field goal with the game on the line in the last play of the game to win it. Very few teams. Most are just crossing their fingers, and some might be flipping a coin. I mean, that's what it comes down to with a lot of kickers in this league. But to your point, not that the Ravens were packing up on the sideline, but I think there was all the confidence in the world that he was going to make that kick, and he did it.
We have plenty to talk about in the aftermath of yet another Ravens victory in 10-2, a trip to Buffalo this week. All eyes continue to be on the New England Patriots and bye weeks and where we're going to be and continuing to have big trust. Luke Jones, you can find him out at Twitter and on Facebook in Baltimore, Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. You can find us anytime, anywhere out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Tons of Baltimore positive stuff coming your way this week as we all hail Lamar and prepare for the anchor buyer in wings this week. Then a short week against the Jets next week as well. Hope you're following my journey to the Far East out on social media and bullet trains and all sorts of cool stuff. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as in our morning newspaper. I'm going to be writing a little bit this week as well. You can follow that, subscribe. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com, where it's always $5 down, $10 a month. And, of course, Dennis back in his regular home with the Dennis Colazzo Show on Thursday from 3 until 5, getting you ready to go to Buffalo. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. And yes, the Ravens are 10-2, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.